Hi, welcome to Super Awesome Film Club episode 30. Tonight we are going to be talking about Nosferatu versus Nosferatu. My name is Adelaide Blair and I'll be your host tonight. And our usual panel is Io Blair-Freese, our movie philosopher. Hi, Io.
Hi, everybody.
And our other panelist is Nick Thacker, our young man about town, although now it's a new town in California. I guess we still love him. Hi, Nick.
Hey, do you know where in California?
Didn't you were in Oakland, but now you're in Berkeley?
Right across the border.
Yeah, Oakland's better, but I'm not going to judge you for, being all fancy pants in Berkeley now.
Wow.
Those are some lines there, Nick.
I have more to say about that, but this is not the time or the place.
Okay, so let's get started. So tonight we're doing a versus. We're going to look at the 1922 version of Nosferatu and then the 1979 Werner Herzog version. Okay, so basically it's the same story. So I'm only going to go through this once. Only the Nosferatu, at the time, Bram Stoker's Dracula was not yet in the public domain and he didn't have the rights to it, so they used different names. And then in '79, when Werner Herzog did it, he used all of the names from Dracula. So I think we are probably going to use those names, if that's okay with everybody.
Works for me.
We'll
see. Okay, so 1922, it's directed by F.W. Murnau. Count Orlok is played by Max Schreck. Hutter is played by Gustav von Wagenheim, and then Ellen is played by Greta Schroeder. 1979 version of Nosferatu, directed by Werner Herzog. Count Dracula is played by Klaus Kinski. Lucy Harker is played by Isabella Gianni, and Jonathan Harker is played by our friend Bruno Ganz, who we just saw recently in Wings of Desire. Okay, so basically this is actually, both of these versions are fairly close to the novel Dracula. And most versions of Dracula stray wildly from the novel, but this is actually pretty close up until the point where Dracula enters the town once he gets off the boat and stuff. And then it kind of diverges. And there are some other differences, but whatever, I'm not going to get into it. That's a whole other different show. Okay. So there's this guy, Hutter Harker, who is told by his boss that he needs to go to Transylvania because the Count Orlok, Count Dracula, wants to buy a house. Hutter Harker is like, yeah, that sounds awesome. So he heads off to Transylvania. He meets the Count, at which point nobody in any movie ever goes, this guy is really ugly. I think there's something wrong with him. Like, everybody is just sort of like, yeah, Orlok Dracula, he looks normal. He does not. Anyway, Dracula starts sucking his blood, and then Dracula signs the lease, and then Dracula goes over to Germany or wherever and moves in across the street from Hutter, and he's kind of sucking everybody's blood, and everybody thinks it's the plague, but really it's a vampire. And then Lucy decides that she figures out that if she sacrifices herself by keeping Dracula Orlok there after the rooster crows, that he will die. So she does that thing, and then stuff happens. Okay, so Io. That's not the most exciting. Sorry, I wasn't the best analysis of that, but it's a pretty straightforward plot. There's not a lot that goes on. It's a lot of atmosphere in both movies. Io, what did you think?
So this is a versus, so I have to pick which one is my favorite. I'll start with that. I have a very clear favorite, and that is the original. I will tell you why. The original movie is so funny. Even with it being, how old is that movie now? 45?
Almost 100 years old.
Way older than I just said. Almost 100 years old. The jokes are still very funny, with the translation, with the test of time. It's like at first you don't notice it in the acting, but then when I caught on was the scene where he goes to put his pen away and he drops it the first time and then he goes to put it back and they show that. It's all very intentional. And they play out these little intricacies of the characters with this humor. Unfortunately, the reason I would turn to the Werner Herzog version is because the female character in it is a little bit more pronounced. She's less of kind of like a joke character. But I just think that the original one is so charming. And there's something to be said about having a sense of humor about it, where the Werner Herzog one is just so serious.
Well, and to be fair, you know, women could only had voting rights in America like 2 years before this movie was made. So.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not, without giving away my favorite, the one thing I did like about, or one thing I liked, one of the things I liked about the Herzog version is that Isabella Gianni was very stylized in her looks and with the dark makeup around her eyes and very much like a silent movie actress, and a lot of, you know, she did a lot of this with her hands and sort of referencing the earlier film, and while that it was very stilted, and in fact my husband I don't think liked that very much, I actually really enjoyed that part of it and the whole stylized nature of it, and wish the film had gone even more so in that direction.
I think that there were some good scenes, like the inn scene where when he says where he's going, everybody turns and stops and kind of stays. That's a very stylistic kind of hint back to the time of the original silent movie, where it's kind of choppier and there's a little bit more freeze frame.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nick, what did you think?
So I watched Herzog's Nosferatu first, intentionally, so as not to give the original an unfair advantage. And I really loved it. I thought, seeing it before the original, I thought it was a really great counterpoint to most Dracula films, because it was so understated and quiet and visceral. Like the climax of the film when Count Dracula is biting Lucy, it's like completely silent, and there's all you hear is this really quiet sort of sucking sound, and there's no crescendo of screeching violins or close-ups of teeth sinking into her skin or even any blood for that matter. And we see this action from like really far away. It's just two people in space, and it makes Dracula's big moment look like an act of like lonely desperation, and it feels really delicate rather than carnal or predatory. The count of both films, Herzog's especially, I think is the most human and subtle Dracula that we ever see, really. There's a loneliness at the center of each of their characters that you don't get with like Bela Lugosi's Dracula in the first Dracula movie. I think it's the closest to a round character that we ever get with Dracula. A moment in Herzog's that I really liked was the plague-stricken townies having a final dinner party out in the open, saying that they're dying, so they might as well enjoy every last second. It was so peculiar and surreal, but you almost miss how surreal it is in context because it's so effortlessly dropped in there. It kind of felt like dreaming something really, really weird and not questioning it because you're dreaming and you don't realize how weird it was until after you woke up. And it really accentuates how alone Lucy and the remaining sane people in Visborg are in their plight against this new evil force from the east. So I really, really liked Herzog's. The question I had going into Murnau's Nosferatu was, is this anything more than an artifact today? And the short answer I came away with was yes, it is. I was really impressed by its range as a film. There's a lot of interesting camera work. I was anticipating a lot of like stationary long shots, and there's so many different settings. I sort of imagine early films taking place in one or two spots with not a lot of movement. But Hutter's journey in both movies feels really, really long and tiring. And I had this theory going in that it would feel like kind of an inverse radio drama. Like instead of having all dialogue and no visual, you have only visuals and no dialogue, and the MO of the film being to just lead the viewer through a plot. But this had some real atmosphere to it. And I loved the writing and was impressed by how flowery and decadent it was. The castle was great. It didn't feel any smaller than Herzog's. And the ubiquitous sequence when Count Orlok is ascending the stairs to Ellen's room is certainly worth all of the press it gets. And I didn't realize how early in the 20s this movie was, and was even more impressed knowing so. The makeup's great. This is how vampires are supposed to look. The fingernails are awesome. Shrek's vampire in the original one has this campiness that comes from his really like lanky sort of John Cleese like strut. I laughed out loud at that shot of him schlepping his coffin across town after docking in Visburg. And Kinski's vampire is just so subtle and feels so human in his loneliness. My final verdict is that both of them really hold up on their own as singular entities. I really, really liked Herzog's, and I guess if I have to pick one that I enjoyed watching more, I would go with that one. I don't know if I'm being a contrarian in saying that yet. But, I watched it before the original and really appreciated it for its subtlety. And after watching the original, it's evident that a lot of that just comes from it being based on this pretty subtle, silent German expressionist film. But it works really well as a love letter to the original. And Murnau's, I think a lot of people today get something from it and find it an enjoyable movie to watch and not just for some sort of novelty. So I guess if we're keeping score, chalk one up for Herzog for me.
Okay, so right now we are 1 for Nosferatu and 1 for Nosferatu.
All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the tiebreaker here. I had a clear favorite, which was the 1922 version.
Of course you did.
Well, so I like Herzog the documentarian, but I often find Herzog the fiction film guy tedious. And there are parts of this movie that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed Isabella Gianni. I have a hard time with Klaus Kinski because he was such a vile human being, from what I understand, that sometimes I have trouble separating myself from that. This movie, I think he is really almost tender, and that scene that you talk about at the end where he is sucking her blood is very sensual without being sexual or explicit in any sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
But I found Murnau's film, the imagery, to be deeper and more beautiful to me. And in a movie that is, in both movies, I mean, they have the same plot. There isn't much that's going on. At first, I wasn't sure I could get into the 22 version because Hutter is a freaking nutbag. Like, he laughs at everything. He's like, I'm going to go to Transylvania. Yes, that's hilarious. I've got these 2 weird mosquito bites on my neck. Yes, that's hilarious. Yes, Orlok's a freak. What?
The overacting is part of the humor of the movie, though.
Yeah, but I mean, he just thought everything is hysterical to him.
Yeah, he's an idiot.
But I got into it after a while. Like, once he calms down a little bit and understands the seriousness of his situation, And I just found some of the imagery of Ellen sitting by the seaside in the graveyard. I thought was really beautiful. I thought that was also beautifully done by Herzog as well, though. But just a lot of the things, Orlok on the ship seemed much more atmospheric to me. When he, after he carries his coffin through the town, and he's on the boat carrying his coffin going to the ruined house, I think is really beautiful. When he's sucking Ellen's blood, I also found that to be beautiful. And so at what point is Ellen going to be like, hey, there's a freak in the house? like in the Herzog version, he like comes and talks to her, and she's all like having a conversation with him instead of like, hey, there's a really ugly guy in my house. So
vampires put spells on people, right?
I guess so. For me, the most fun part, and I hate to say fun, but so I was watching the Herzog version with my husband, and so at the end when he's sucking Lucy's blood and the rooster crows and the sun comes up, my husband is all like, ooh, looks like Nosferatu's got to do the walk of shame with his little pretty shoes in his hand. So, yeah. And it was, I had that feeling, though, that Darren was right, that, like, it does feel like, yeah, Nosferatu's got to do the walk of shame now.
Yeah.
And die. And I did not, I have to say, what really sealed the deal for me was I did not like the changes in the ending in the Herzog version. Spoiler, Jonathan Harkin turns into a vampire and goes off into the sunset. And I just thought that was kind of lame. Like, I like the ending in the first one because Lucy sacrifices herself for the betterment of the whole town. And in Herzog's version, that sacrifice is made meaningless. And I think, as a viewer, I resented it. I didn't dislike it as much as my husband did, but yeah, I found it to be frustrating. And definitely, I like the first version better.
Well, Nosferatu wins.
Nosferatu wins. Does anybody have any other comments or?
I thought it was cool to see what special effects were like watching the original version.
I really like the scene where Hutter's watching Count Orlok stack up the coffins, and then he gets in one, and then the lid moves itself onto the coffin.
There are a lot of
I thought that was
yeah.
And every time he sort of apparated,
yeah,
with the shot-on-shot thing was really great. I've never seen a non-documentary Herzog film before, and he definitely brings the same kind of staring into the void approach.
The Abyss, yeah. The Abyss was definitely looking back out of Kinski's eyes.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that's all that was ever in them. So I really don't like Kinski. But yeah. But that's another episode. Okay, so I would like to thank everybody for joining us today, and we will be back in a couple months with Season 4 of Super Awesome Film Club. Watch the skies, everybody.
Watch the skies. Oh, there's a bat up here.